As Canadians, I think it is on us to set a standard for what is or isn't acceptable from our government. And this is not acceptable. Canada sold $18.9 million worth of military goods to Israel, despite their so called pause. So, in this video, I'm going to get to this story, the breakdown of it, what led up to it, the good moves that Canada has made, moves in the right direction, but clearly nowhere near where Canada should be, considering the genocide that is being committed by an ally in Israel. So, I first want to give credit here to the Maple and Alex Kosh for breaking this all down. There are some fantastic Canadian journalists out there, be it at the Maple, at Ricochet, the Narwhal, the Breach, Canadian Dimension, Press Progress, the Tyee. There are others as well. There is just a lot of fantastic journalists within Canada who are largely, or I should say a lot of them, work in independent spaces and need your support to continue their kind of work. So if you support a place like the Maple or any of the other websites I mentioned or anybody else, ensure you support them if you can, because it helps to allow them to continue doing the reporting they're doing. But before I get to the breakdown of this, I just do want to properly set the stage here for what led us here. So the UN reporting here, more than 50,000 children reportedly killed or injured in the Gaza Strip. That is as of May 27th this year. Now, of course, if you expand out to all civilians, the number is much, much larger. It's still impossible for there to be a real count of what is going on because there is just a complete lack of infrastructure right now in Gaza for there to be anybody there to really account for the level of war crimes being committed by the Israeli government. But this is where we get to some of the reactions so far, both internationally, but also from Canada and Canadians themselves. International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Netanyahu, so of course that was back in November. Fast forward to yesterday, joint statement by the foreign ministers of Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Norway, and the UK in their sanctioning of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. These are two Israeli ministers being sanctioned for inciting violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. So this was a move that was praised by human rights groups like Independent Jewish Voices, though of course they are still calling for more to be done, while at the same time criticized by Israel's biggest ally, the US. Now, I am glad to see people are becoming more and more aware of what is happening. So this was a poll released just today from Leger on the attitudes towards what is happening in Gaza. So on the question of whether Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, in Canada, nearly half, 49% agree with the accusation. Liberal and NDP voters are significantly more likely to strongly agree, which is not surprising, compared to 38% in the US. So it's good that almost a majority of the Canadian population are very clear on what is going on. Worth noting, 30% are still unsure, meaning there's still 30% that are people we can educate on this. If you disagree that there's a genocide going on, I think it's unlikely at this point, after everything we have seen, that you're going to change your mind. You're likely just stuck in whatever rabbit hole you're in. But if you're open, or if you're unsure as to what is going on, I think it is possible that you can and will be educated on the realities. Now, this gets to one of the bigger moves that Canada made. About a year ago, Canada halting arms sales to Israel after non-binding vote in the House of Commons. So the reality of this was a little different. Global Affairs Canada's approach since January 8th, 2024 has been to not issue permits and to suspend a limited number of export permits for military items destined for Israel, as in not issuing new permits. So anything signed prior to January 8th was okay until Minister Joly came out to expand it a little bit more. This was in September.
So, first and foremost, our policy has been clear. Since January 8th, we and I have not accepted any form of arms export permits to be sent to Israel. And so following that, I asked my department to look into any existing permits of arms or parts of arms that could have been sent to Israel. Following that, I suspended this summer around 30 existing permits of Canadian companies, and we're asking questions to these companies.
Now, keep in mind, this was only done because of the pressure being put on the Canadian government. The obvious fact from the international community of what is going on, the ICC arrest warrant of Netanyahu made it undeniable, and that was just a month or so later. So the pressure being put on the Canadian government is why there has been this move in the right direction, even though, again, as we're going to see, it's not where it needs to be. As it turns out, despite the pause or the ending of some of those exports and the ending of anything new, Canada still sold 18.9 million of military goods to Israel. Now, this gets to, before I get to the breakdown, Yipeng Ji, who is a doctor, Canadian doctor, who was in Gaza, one of the incredible heroes, someone putting themselves on the line to help people in a war zone. Or I shouldn't even call it a war zone. It help people who are being targeted in war crimes, putting himself on the line, considering hospitals, several hospitals have been targeted and destroyed by the Israeli government, putting himself on the line. Here is his hypothesis, as he says, as to why the Canadian government has, up to this point, still been unwilling to be clear about the genocide that the Israeli government is committing.
I do have a hypothesis as to why, our Canadian government has not acknowledged what's happening in Gaza as a genocide. And looking at the other examples that you've given, Canada is not explicitly complicit in other genocides. But it is in this one. And for the Canadian government to actually acknowledge what is happening in Gaza as a genocide is a crime. It is a crime by this Canadian government, by current leaders that are upholding ongoing trade with Israel, ongoing arms sales to Israel, and should be tried for their war crimes.
I think this makes a whole lot of sense, considering the UN, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, a litany of human rights groups worldwide have called out what this is, a genocide. The Canadian government still is dancing around the topic because they're afraid of their complicity in it, as weapons are still being sold to the Israeli government. Now, this gets to this report, which comes right out of the Global Affairs Canada, as Michael Buchert compares it here to last year. It's the difference in the title is noteworthy. In 2023, the report was called Exports of Military Goods and Technology. In 2024, the word military is nowhere to be found. Instead, it's the annual report on strategic goods and technologies pursuant to Section 27 of the Export and Import Permits Act. Seems like they are very aware of the reality. So as the maple breaks down, and again, I will link to this article below the video. There is a lot of information in here. I'm not going to read all of it for obvious reasons, but you can go check it out if you wish. So as the Global Affairs Canada report states, Canadian companies sold 18.9 million of military goods to Israel in 2024. In total, 164 export permits were used by Canadian companies to ship military goods to Israel, making it the third most popular non-U.S. destination for Canadian suppliers last year. The majority of goods, 12.5 million worth, related to an export category that includes electronic equipment, and a further 2.2 million fell under a category that includes bombs, torpedoes, rockets, missiles, other explosive devices and charges, and related equipment and accessories. 2.8 million worth of goods fell under a category that includes aircraft and aerial drones. Keeping in mind the Israeli government committing war crimes with these weapons and technology that they received from Canada. Now, they also note here, the report does not track exports that are sold to the U.S. before being supplied by the U.S. to Israel, meaning the actual value of Canadian goods that ended up in Israel could be much higher. Most military exports to the U.S., except those defined as full system conventional arms, do not require a permit and are not published in the annual reports. So that, for obvious reasons, is a little tougher to track where that stuff's going to go once it reaches the U.S. But I'm sure there's some awareness of what is being supplied to the U.S. and how a lot of that is going to eventually be used. And in the case of a lot of it, likely, or at least some of it, ending up in the hands of the Israeli government. Now, they also write here, despite the pause on new export permits, Israel remains among 46 countries on Canada's automatic firearms country control list, which allows exporters to ship prohibited firearms, weapons, or devices to foreign governments. Why they are still on that list, despite the sanctions, despite the fact that Netanyahu's under an arrest warrant, despite the obvious impact of the war crimes of the genocide, is beyond me. But that's something that I think needs to be focused on. Also worth mentioning here, Rachel Small, an organizer with World Beyond War Canada, stressed that while the new export data shows the January 8th, 2024 pause impact of weapon sales to Israel, any claims by liberal politicians that exports have stopped completely are evidently false. Quote, while we did successfully push the government to pause issuing any new permits, our outrage following the announcement that they nonetheless were going to continue to export weapons from previously approved permits was absolutely warranted. So there was a lot of pushback at the time that, hey, why are you complaining? You know, here Canada's doing what they need to do, pausing these export permits, when the reality was always that, yes, this is a step in the right direction. But considering the stakes, considering what is happening on the ground, this clearly is not enough.